Our good friend David Barton from Wall Builders, and this is July 3rd, so tomorrow's Independence Day. All across America, we'll be celebrating that event that took place 200 plus years ago. And joining us to talk about that and much more is David. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, guys. Good to be with you.
Hey, David, I know international politics is not your area of expertise necessarily, but man, who do you support in this world?
Yeah.
You know, you got bad and worse oftentimes, don't you?
There's a few guidelines that are you just kind of inflexible on, and one is you don't support the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
And so that's the first problem. Morsi was. We now have a situation where that we have sent 400 of our F-16s and Abrams tanks to Egypt, and that's America's
How
got
many?
the best military in the world.
David, how
And
many
so
did you say?
400 F-16s and Abrams tanks to Egypt, to Morsi. And America's got the best military in the world, but we use F-16s and Abrams tanks. These are not old, antiquated, outdated things that we just are looking to get rid of. We have sent top of the line stuff. And by the way, that's what Israel also has. Actually, Israel has a different tank, but they use F-16s. And so we've given this to Morsi. And that's after he says, Israel is the little Satan, America's the great Satan. We'll take care of the little one, then we'll come after the big. And we've got their cabinet on open mic talking about how that America is their enemy, and we've been duped, and we're supporting them. And so this week, Obama says, now, Morsi, if you don't get this under control, I'm going to have to think about whether we deliver the rest of those planes and tanks. No. We should never have done this. Muslim Brotherhood, period, across the board. Syria, anywhere else in the Arab Spring, that those are not allies, period. And that should have been our number one rule of foreign policy, because we proved that since 1784 when the first war against Islam broke out in America.
Well, they're saying the people over there in Egypt who are against Morsi, or most of them are, they probably would be pro-Western, but pro-American.
Yeah.
But because they want more freedom, they're tired of living under dictatorial regimes, whoever the dictator is. And they're angry at Obama for supporting who they call another dictator, Morsi. So all you did was you replaced Mubarak, who had been there forever, and basically kept the peace with Israel and been an ally of America, although he himself was a dictator. But now you've changed that over to a more extreme. Mubarak was more of a secular guy.
Yeah.
Morsi's more of is a Muslim Brotherhood guy who would impose Sharia law if he could.
Well, he's worked on it, and actually the stated objective of the Muslim Brotherhood is to restore the caliphate. So it's to bring the whole world under Muslim rule. And so Muslim Brotherhood is working in a number of nations. They all have the same objective, same goal. And in that part of the world, a secular government is a wonderful government.
Absolutely.
Because it's not Muslim Brotherhood. And so what we've seen already with the Sharia law stuff, what has happened with the slaughter of Coptic Christians, under the secular government, they protected Coptic Christians. Under the religious Muslim government, they're wiping them out.
David Barton, our guest from Wall Builders. You can visit his website, wallbuilders.com, wallbuilders.com. Nobody has better historical DVDs and books than David and Wall Builders Ministries, and they work very diligently to...
America's Spiritual Heritage DVD series is incredible.
One thing I was impressed, David, with you, and of course our good friend Stephen McDowell has good resources as well. But one thing I was impressed, David, you guys... as you study in history and you write about history, and I want you to take us back in just a moment to July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia. But before we do that, you have to do so much. You've had to do so much research over your lifetime, you and your team and your staff. And when you write things down as you go, maybe sometime later on you discover maybe there was a little bit of a factual misrepresentation, not intentionally, but something we found out different or more or something. And you always are working to make sure everything you put out is accurate. And you even one time stopped a DVD, I remember, because you said, "Hey man, we got to change something in there." And it wasn't a big deal, but it was a minor thing that David wanted right. So you guys That's the nature of your work, isn't it? In dealing with history and research.
Yeah, and in our books, we probably average 2,000 facts a book. And so 2,000
Wow.
facts a book. And we've put out, I think I put out 37 books thereabouts. So, there's times you get dates wrong or names wrong or locations wrong or something else. And so it has always been our standing policy whenever anything wrong is pointed out, we go back, investigate, verify if it's wrong, we instantly change it. And so, every edition we have coming out with 2,000 facts, there may be one or two that are errant somewhere, but that's down in the, tenths, hundreds of percentage kind of stuff. And the real problem with that is we wouldn't need to be doing this almost by ourselves sometimes if you had universities and educators doing what they're supposed to be doing.
There you go.
And what we've had to do is go back and pull out all the stuff that they refuse to talk about or that they completely, absolutely misportray. And if you had, 100, 200, 300, 400 professors researching actual historical documents, we wouldn't have to be doing what we're doing, but we do it because we have so shifted education in the last 50 years that we're determined to make the founding of America look really evil and bad, and the founding fathers really, really bad guys, and which is why what you and Steve McDowell do is so much fun when people go and see the actual places, because then all the stories you've been told doesn't make any sense once you see the actual facts.
Absolutely.
And that kind of history is, you can have historical debates and have people on the panel debate things, but when you get to go see the actual documents, the actual locations, the actual places, debate's over, slam dunk, end of the story. And that's what we try to do, even with our website and bringing out the 100,000 documents we own, is just post those things like crazy so people can see for themselves.
David Barton with us from Texas. David is president and founder of Wall Builders. You can visit him in his work and his ministry online at wallbuilders.com, wallbuilders.com. David, take us back to 1776 and what happened in Philadelphia that day. I really want our listeners, many of them maybe have heard the story, but I want our listeners to really appreciate what our founders envisioned and what they went through to produce this Declaration of Independence. I mean, there was a great division among the people in this. It wasn't a country at that time. It was colonies, I guess, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, it was like Europe. It was a bunch of independent nations. We called them colonies, but if you went from North Carolina to South Carolina, you had to stop at the border and change money. Every state had its own money. Everything was, every state, every colony was like a nation. Like going from, now you've got the euros, but before you had the euros, you go from Poland to any other nation, you got to stop and change currency. And that's the way America was. I think what people don't understand about the revolution is, number one, the Founding Fathers did not call it a revolution. They were not into revolution. They did not want revolution. They called it a civil war, and that was their term until, years in, and then the term revolution stopped, which is what the British called it. The Founding Fathers had sought to alleviate grievances for over 11 years, and kind of the final thing in 1776 was when they got word back, and they sent the olive branch petition to the king saying, look, we don't want to separate. We just want to work out the differences. And when he refused to even read their olive branch petition, they knew that they were pointing separation. So it's at that point that in June the 6th of 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia makes a resolution that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And at that time, that's the first official call in Congress to, hey, let's be independent. And Congress then convened a committee, and they took that committee, and for the next month or so, they tabled the motion, but they convened a committee to look into it, and that was the Committee of Five who drafted the Declaration. So that Committee of Five, Robert Livingston and Ben Franklin and Roger Sherman and Jefferson and Adams, they start preparing the Declaration. Now, officially, they're a committee looking into this, but they're getting the Declaration ready. And then on the 28th of June of 1776, they present the Declaration to Congress. At that point, before they take up the Declaration, what they have to do is vote, well, are we going to be an independent nation? And if we are, then we'll look at the Declaration afterwards. So on July the 2nd, they vote to become an independent nation, to actually officially separate from Great Britain. And at that point, that's where John Adams gets all elated. He writes great letters to Abigail. He says that day, Independence Day, should be celebrated as a day of solemn deliverance by acts of devotion to God Almighty. So he thinks that day ought to be a religious holiday in American history. And then starting at that point, from that vote on July the 2nd, they then, till July the 4th, debate the language of the Declaration of Independence. Primarily, Jefferson wrote it. You really have Roger Sherman and Livingston who deferred to Jefferson totally. Jefferson asked Adams and Franklin for some input, and they made some corrections or changes to the Declaration. It then came to Congress. Congress made a few more changes on the Declaration, and on July the 4th is when we approved the Declaration. So July the 2nd was Independence vote. July the 4th is the language of the Declaration. At that point, John Dunlap, the printer to Congress, that evening starts printing off the Declaration of Independence. And so the first declarations, a few hundred were printed. They have only two names on them. That's John Hancock and Charles Thompson, the Secretary of Congress. It was not until July the 19th that Congress said, hey, let's put everybody's name on this. And on August the 2nd is when they did that beautiful parchment. Prior to that, the Declaration was just printed, just a broadside printed. But then the handwritten copy was done, and on August the 2nd, most of the delegates signed it. It took about a year for all 56 to sign it, and that's how we get to the Declaration we have today.
What were the were we by we I mean the Americans who were British citizens? Were we already at war, physical combat with the British when the Declaration of Independence? Go ahead.
The British have been shooting American citizens since 1770, Boston Massacre. So we've had conflict. We've already been through all the stuff with the blockade of Boston Harbor, the burning of Charleston. We've had Lexington. We've had Concord. We've had Bunker Hill. All of that, all the shots been fired back and forth, and we're still saying we want to reconcile. We want to reconcile. And so when the king absolutely refused, and by the way, this is a big point for the Founding Fathers in their writings, they believe that biblically you cannot have an offensive war. You cannot go you can defend yourself. You can't go on the offense, which is why at Lexington, that first skirmish, their pastor, Jonas Clark, to sum it up in modern English, said, sorry, boys, you can't fire the first shot. Now, if they fire at you, it's self-defense. You can fire back. So you have 700 British firing at 70 Americans, and that's why 18 Americans hit the ground and no British hit the ground. It was a rout. But by the time you get to the second location, Concord Bridge, at that point, they know the British have fired at it. So we're starting to fire back, and that's where the first British hit the ground because they have opened up on us. It's a matter of self-defense. And then in that road going back to Charleston where the British had to march back from Lexington Concord, we had 4,000 to 5,000 Americans shooting at them from the sides of the road and killed about 250 or so British. So, yeah, there's been battle for a long time before the Declaration. But their position is we're not allowed to start anything. We can defend, but we can't start.
David, by the way, folks, you're listening to today's issues. Our guest is David Barton, and he is the president and founder of Wall Builders. David, in your statement a few minutes ago, you mentioned that July 4th should have been celebrated as a religious holiday. What's happened over the years to whitewash that?
Well, it's primarily we don't know our history. Because if you look at schools today, and we teach the Founding Fathers a bunch of atheists, agnostics, deists, you would think, they wouldn't want a religious holiday. So what we do, and it's a brilliant strategy. I mean, it's what the Pharisees tried to do with Jesus. They see all these crowds following Jesus, and they start the stuff like, he's a wine bibber, he's a glutton. They start all the stuff about how bad his character is, and that's designed to separate people from the following. So if you can say, George Washington's a really terrible guy, well, you'll never read his farewell address. You'll never know what he said about religion and morality being the only foundations of political prosperity. So it's a really brilliant strategy on the other part. Our problem is we have not checked out the stats to see if these guys are right. One of the books that we reprinted is called Lives of the Signers, and it's an old public school textbook from 1848. And you go through there and read the public school textbook about how many of these guys were overt, outspoken Christians and what the textbook says about how they displayed their Christianity. And once you read that public school textbook, you would never put up with the notion that the 4th of July is a secular holiday. So a lot of it has happened in the last 40 to 50 years as we've really gotten away from teaching history the way it used to be taught and injected an agenda into it. But that's probably the biggest reason. But I would point to even 61 years after the American Revolution, after the Declaration, old man John Quincy Adams, who had, as a young man seen the Revolution, been part of it, 8 years old, had his musket out with the Massachusetts Minutemen. So here he is 61 years later, and he talked about the fact that at that point, 1837, our